Every child is different. Every child is unique. Each one of them has their own learning gifts and strengths. In other words, children have a wide range of abilities. And with that, each one of them has their own learning needs. For today's video, we will be going to tackle about the differentiated instruction. We will also explore the other concepts related to this topic. This is Carol Ann Tomlinson. She is a leader in the area of differentiated learning and professor of educational leadership, foundations, and policy at the University of Virginia. She describes differentiated instruction as factoring students' individual learning styles and levels of readiness before designing a lesson plan. Research on the effectiveness of differentiation shows this method benefits a wide range of students, from those with learning disabilities to those who are considered high ability. Differentiating instruction may mean teaching the same material to all students using a variety of instructional strategies, or it may require the teacher to deliver lessons at varying levels of difficulty based on the ability of each student. Teachers who practice differentiation in the classroom may design lessons based on students' learning styles, group students by shared interest, topic, or ability for assignments, assess students' learning using formative assessment, manage the classroom to create a safe and supportive environment, and last, continually assess and adjust lesson content to meet students' needs. Now let's talk about the origin of differentiated instruction. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and No Child Left Behind encouraged the use of differentiated and skill-based instruction in schools. Research shows that lecture is the least effective instructional strategy. Lecture has only 5 to 10% learning retention after 24 hours. Engaging in a discussion, practicing after exposure to content, and others are more effective ways to ensure learning retention. Now that you have an idea about what differentiated instruction is, let's get to know more about this topic. But before that, let me introduce to you our team. First would be John Ray Optional, who will discuss the 4 ways to differentiate instruction, to be followed by Roxanne Caruana, who will discuss the pros and cons of differentiated instruction, and to be followed by Ira Legaspi, who will discuss the concept of individual differences. Next would be Lauren Sarsalejo, who will discuss the provisions for individual differences in schools, to be followed by Charlene Remascal, who has the topic of other causes of individualizing instruction, and Jermaline Abrigana for learning and thinking styles. We also have Alberto Alvarado Jr. for multiple intelligences, and last but not the least, Arceli Faith Fat for 9 distinct forms of multiple intelligences.
Good day everyone, I am John Ray Optional, and for today's video, I am going to tackle about the 4 ways to differentiate instruction. So according to Tomlinson, teachers can differentiate instruction through 4 ways, and these are the content, process, product, and learning environment. First is the content. What is taught? What the student needs to learn, or how the students will get access to the information. Fundamental lesson content, as you may know, should cover the learning standards established by the school district or state educational standards. However, some students in your class may be totally unfamiliar with the concept in a lesson, while others may have only a rudimentary understanding, and others may be familiar with the topic before the lecture even begins. You might differentiate the curriculum by creating tasks for different groups of students that cover different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is a classification of levels of intellectual behavior going from lower order thinking skills to higher order thinking skills. Remembering, understanding, applying, creating, analyzing, and evaluating are the 6 levels. So this is the Bloom's taxonomy. Create, produce new or original work. Evaluate, justify a stand or decision. Analyze, draw connections among ideas. Apply, use information in new situations. Understand, explain ideas or concepts. Remember, recall facts and basic concepts. Example of differentiating content: using reading materials at varying readability levels, putting text materials on tape, using spelling or vocabulary lists at readiness levels of students, presenting ideas through both auditory and visual means, using reading buddies, and meeting with small groups to teach an idea or skill for struggling learners or to extend the thinking or skills of advanced learners. Next is the process or how it is taught. Activities in which the student engages in order to make sense of or master the content. Each student has a preferred learning style, and good differentiation includes conveying materials in a variety of ways, including visual, oral, and kinesthetic, as well as through words. This process based strategy also takes into account the reality that not all students require the same level of teaching assistance, and students can work in pairs, small groups, or individually. While some children may benefit from one-on-one time with you or a classroom helper, or others may be able to make progress on their own. Teachers can help students learn more by providing support suited to different requirements. Example of differentiating process: using third activities, providing interest centers, developing personal agendas, task lists written by the teachers, and containing both in common work for the whole class and work that addresses individual needs of learners, offering manipulatives or other hands-on supports, and varying the length of time a student may take to complete a task. So the third one is the product evaluation or how learning is assessed, culminating projects that ask the students to rehearse, apply, and extend what he or she has learned in a unit. The product is the final thing that the student makes to demonstrate mastery of the material. Tests, projects, reports, and other activities are examples of these. Based on learning styles, you could assign students to perform exercises that demonstrate mastery of an educational idea in a manner that the student prefers. Example of differentiating product: giving students options of how to express required learning, using rubrics that match and extend students' varied skills levels, allowing students to work alone or in small groups on their products, and encouraging students to create their own product assignments as long as the assignments contain required elements. So the last one is learning environment. A learning environment is more than just a classroom. It's a space in which students feel safe and supported in their pursuit of knowledge as well as inspired by their surroundings. Physical and psychological factors combine to provide ideal learning circumstances. A flexible classroom plan with various types of equipment and configurations to accommodate both individual and group work is essential. Teachers should utilize classroom management approaches that create a safe and supportive learning environment from a psychological standpoint. Example of differentiating learning environment: making sure there are places in the room to work quietly and without distraction, as well as places that invite student collaboration. Providing materials that reflect a variety of cultures and home settings. Setting out clear guidelines for independent work that matches individual needs. Developing routines that allow students to get help when teachers are busy and cannot help them immediately, and helping students understand that some learners need to move around to learn while others do better sitting quietly. So, guys, those are the four ways to differentiate instruction. Thank you for listening and have a good day.
Let's proceed to the pros and cons of differentiated instruction. Let's begin to its pros or its advantages. Research shows that differentiated instruction is effective for high-ability students as well as students with mild to severe disabilities. And when students are given more options on how they can learn material, they take on more responsibility for their own learning. So this means that in a differentiated instruction, students become more responsible for their own learning. This also increases engagement because when students are being taught lessons that are targeted at their needs, they are more likely to engage in the learning materials, so it increases engagement. It is also student-centered because this ensures that classes are focused on the needs of the students and not the needs of the teacher. It also strives for equity because in a differentiated classroom, the class is more equitable because of the teacher gives every student a due consideration for what their needs really are. This also gives students a choice because a differentiated classroom allows students to learn in ways that they prefer. And if we give students some choice about how they want to learn, we empower them to learn in ways that they prefer. This can dramatically improve a student's learning experience in the classroom. So those are the pros or the advantages of a differentiated instruction. So let's proceed to the cons or the disadvantages of a differentiated instruction. Differentiated instruction is time-consuming and resource-intensive because it requires more work during lesson planning and many teachers struggle to find the extra time in their schedule. And the learning curve can be steep and some schools lack professional development resources, so it is really time-consuming and resource-intensive. Critics argue that there isn't enough research to support the benefits of a differentiated instruction outweighing the added prep time. Differentiated instruction also cannot be done for every student because it is unrealistic to differentiate instruction for a whole class of students that each have their own learning style. There are not enough hours in the day to vary lessons for all the students in a class, so it cannot be done for every student. It is also unrealistic in the context of standardized tests because most teachers have to prepare students for standardized tests, and standardized test is the exact opposite of a differentiated classroom. Because if we are teaching in varied ways, we're not actually preparing students for their test, so it is unrealistic in the context of standardized test. Students also need to learn in a different ways in a differentiated instruction, which is very a disadvantage for them. Because if we differentiated learning so students can learn in ways that they personally prefer, we may be doing our students a disservice or disadvantage. Because for example, if a student says they prefer to learn via movies than books, then they'll never become better at reading, or they will give more focus in learning to the things that they prefer to learn and disregard those things that they don't want to learn. So they will have a hard time in learning other things that they don't want to learn. So it is a disadvantage. So those are the cons or the disadvantages of a differentiated instruction. So here is a simplified view form or in a tabular presentation of the pros and cons of a differentiated instruction. You may take some screenshots if you wanted to. And thank you for listening, everyone. Bye bye.
Now we are done in the pros and cons of differentiated instruction. Now we will understand the concept of individual differences to give us the justification on the need to differentiate instruction in education. Individual variation is a universal phenomenon. It is said that no two individuals are exactly alike. They differ from each other in some way or the other. It refers to the extent of type of distinctions among individuals on some of the significant psychological traits, their personal characteristic, their cognitive and emotional components, and also the common difference of the learners or the individuals, like their gender, their age, their intelligence, their ability, their interests, and also learning style, and etc. Such a similarity or difference between persons reveals individual differences in the early 1800s. The science of psychology studies people at three levels of focus captured by this well-known quote, "Every man is in certain respect." So the first level is every man is in certain respect like all other men. He is like all other men because some of the determinants of his personality are universal to the species. That is to say, there are common features in the biological endowment of all men, in the physical environment they inhabit, and in the societies and cultures in which they develop. The second level is every man is in certain respect like some other men. It is in certain features of personality, most men are like some other men. The similarity may be to the other members of the same socio-cultural unit. Last level is every man is in certain respect like no other man. So this level is where the individual differences psychology study focuses on. There is an inescapable fact that a man is in many respects like no other man. Each individual's modes of perceiving, feeling, needing, and behaving have characteristic patterns which are not precisely duplicated by those of any other individual. This is traceable in part to the unique combination of biological materials which the person has received from his parents. More exactly, the ultimate uniqueness of each personality is the product of countless and successive interactions between the maturing constitution and different environing situations from the birth onward. In order to justify the need to have differentiated instruction in education, we need to first understand and define what is individual differences or DI. So DI stands for the variation or deviation among individuals in regard to a single characteristic or a number of characteristics. DI are those differences which in their totality distinguish one individual from another. So we can say that individual differences are the differences among humans that are distinguished or separate them from one another and makes one as a single unique individual. Individuals and of course the learners differ in various abilities, their capacities, and personality characteristics, so it is necessary to adapt individual tendencies in education. So the teacher must be sensitive enough to his learners' differences. He or she should acknowledge the following. The first one is, in any group, there are individuals who deviate from the norms of the group. Along with the average, there is the presence of superior or an individual who stand out in the class, and also an individual or a learner who is also extremely dull. However, the teacher should realize these differences and should have fairness in his or her class, and is equally possible in a classroom. The second one, the teacher should acknowledge that it is wrong to expect uniformity in gaining proficiency or success in a particular field from a group of students. So a teacher should not expect much from his class because the learner differ in their skills and capabilities, in their subnormal intelligence, in their previous background, in their lack of proper interest, and also the learner's aptitude and attitude. Some students have to lag behind in some or other area of achievement, so a teacher should not expect that all of her students understand that area of learning. The third one is every teacher should try to have the desired knowledge of the abilities, capacities, interests, attitudes, aptitudes, and other personality traits of his pupils, and in the light of this knowledge, should render individual guidance to the children for maximum utilization of their potentialities. The teacher should also acknowledge that all students cannot be benefited by one particular method of instruction and the uniform and rigid curriculum. As I said earlier, children develop in different rates, so the method of teaching cannot be done in just one particular method. The teacher should utilize methods in which all students can understand and comprehend that certain area. The fifth one, the teacher has to adopt different types of methods of teaching considering individual difference related to its interests and the learner's need. Each student is a unique individual, so a teacher should cater his or her learners' differences to neither narrow the gap between learners nor to even out their abilities and performance. It should aim for understanding why students are able to learn well and finding appropriate ways to help them learn better. Lastly, the teacher should acknowledge the aims of education, the curriculum, the method of teaching that should be linked with individual differences, considering the different abilities and traits individual. The aim of education is to enable each student to attain all-around development according to his or her own attributes. To achieve this, students should be provided with suitable assistance and guidance in accordance with their abilities and learning needs, so that they can develop their potential to the fullest. So that is all for the concept of individual differences. Thank you for listening. But before that, always remember, respect individual differences.
Hello! So, okay pa ba ta diring dapita? So, since we are already introduced to individual differences, let's now move on to the provisions for individual differences in school. Since we have differences, we can say that in schools, educators will really have a hard time to cater all the differences of the students. But in order to give a quality education, teachers should provide adjustments and some modifications. Here's an example scenario. A teacher have 35 students in her class. Each of her students have their own unique abilities, traits, and interests. How will she cater the individual differences of her students? So the first course of action to be taken in order to make provisions for individual differences in school is to have proper knowledge of individual personalities, where you recognize the abilities, interests, aptitudes, and other personality traits of your individual students. Because without knowing the different personalities of your students, you can't properly choose what is the appropriate method of teaching to be utilized. Or you might leave some students behind, resulting to a non-conducive classroom. And in order to have proper knowledge on the differences of the students, there should be frequent assessment. So meaning, kailangan usa nato silang i-assess para makakonclude ta nga mao di ay ni ang ilang mga kalahian nga areas. And it should be taken in the form of intelligence test, cumulative record card, interest inventories, attitude scales, and aptitude test. And as you can see, we have there an example of an intelligence test question, an aptitude test, and an attitude scale. Next, we have ability grouping. Remember that the first course of action that you've taken is to have proper knowledge about the differences of your students, right? By using those tests. So after knowing the differences of your students, especially their different potentials in various dimensions, students can be divided into similar or homogeneous groups. Example, sa Group A, puro sila hilig og arts. Sa Group B, kay naay mga special needs. Then sa Group C, kay puro mga ni-excel academically. So this means that we group students based on their similarities. and it is said that it is beneficial on the adjustments of the method of instruction. Third, we have adjusting the curriculum. So because of the differences of the students, the curriculum must be flexible and differentiated. It should not be fixed and only focus on one particular type of student. It should offer a variety of courses so that students get the chance to get the opportunity to study and work in a field suited for their own potentials and abilities. Fourth is adjusting the methods of teaching. Knowing that there is a varying individual differences inside a classroom, it is effective if teachers adjust or adopt a different method of teaching. Of course, teachers have the freedom to create his or her own plan and strategy as well as adapting a different method of instruction. Lastly is adapting social programs or methods for individualizing instruction. Under this, schools may also adopt special programs or methods of teaching such as Dalton Plan, Winnetka Plan, project method, or use program learning material for enabling the students to learn at their own individual rate. Let us talk about the Dalton Plan and Winnetka Plan. Dalton Plan, also known as Laboratory Plan, is instead sa usual nga classroom and grade teacher, natay subject laboratories and specialists. And also instead of putting students in one room, pupils have access to as many laboratories and are permitted to move from one subject laboratory to another. And that's how the Dalton Plan works. It features freedom of movement and choice of materials by students. While Winnetka Plan is dividing the curriculum into two parts. One part concentrated on instruction in basic skills like writing and reading. The second part is made up of cultural and creative experiences taught in group settings. It is also where students absorb lessons as much as he or she enjoyed. And that's all for the provisions for individual differences in school.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Charlene Go Remiscal, and today I will explain the other causes of individualizing instructions. First, what is individualized instruction? Individualized instruction refers to the use of strategies, resources, and assessments to meet the needs of one particular learner. It ensures that a student is getting the proper guidance, flexibility, and learning support to expand opportunities for academic growth. A learner's profile gives an educator information that shows both a student's strengths and weaknesses. This information is usually based on different forms of data collection. There are other causes of individualizing instruction. For the purpose of this, a few practical measures can also prove beneficial, such as 1. The student's strength of the class or section should be made as small as possible. 2. The teacher should try to pay individual attention to the group under instruction. 3. The teacher should keep in view the individual difference of his students while engaging them in drill or practice work in the classroom or assigning home task. 4. In case where ability grouping is not possible, and more specifically under the prevalent system of class teaching, special coaching and guidance program for both the dull and the gifted children are most helpful. Learning and thinking styles, to be discussed by Obregana Germelin, and multiple intelligences, to be discussed by Alberto Alvarado, are among the variances among students. Listen more about the various learning thinking styles and multiple intelligences to have a better understanding of how students think and learn, as well as to understand the need for differentiation.
Good day, everyone. And now, let's proceed to the learning or thinking styles and multiple intelligences. It's essential for us to know these things, as this will lead us to a better understanding of how students think and learn, as well as to understand the need for differentiation. So let's start with the learning or thinking styles. It is one factor that brings about student diversity. Individuals think and learn in distinct ways. In any group of learners, there will always be different learning characteristics. So these refer to the preferred way an individual processes information. These describe a person's typical mode of thinking, remembering, or problem solving. Furthermore, your style is usually described as a personality dimension which influences your attitudes, values, and social interaction. There are several perspectives about learning or thinking styles, but we shall focus on sensory preferences and the global analytic continuum. The first one is the sensory preferences. When we say sensory, it is connected with the physical senses of touch, smell, taste, hearing, and sight. In sensory preferences, individuals tend to gravitate toward one or two types of sensory input and maintain a dominance in one of the following types: the visual learners, auditory learners, tactile, and kinesthetic learners. Visual learners. They must see their teacher's actions and facial expressions to fully understand the content of a lesson. They often prefer to take detailed notes to absorb the information. They may think in pictures and learn best from visual aids including diagrams, illustrated textbooks, overhead transparencies, videos, flip charts, and handouts. If you are a visual learner, you learn by reading or seeing pictures. You understand and remember things by sight. So Richard further breaks down visual learners into two: the visual iconic and the visual symbolic. When we say visual iconic, they are more interested in visual imagery such as film, graphic displays, or pictures in order to solidify learning. They usually have good picture memory. They would like to read a map better than to read a book. And for the visual symbolic, learners feel comfortable with abstract symbolism such as mathematical formula or the written word. They would prefer to read a book than a map and would like to read about things than hear about them. They tend to be good abstract thinkers. The second one under the sensory preferences is the auditory learners. They learn best through the verbal lectures, discussions, talking things through, and listening to what others have to say. They interpret the underlying meanings of speech through listening to the tone of voice, pitch, speed, and other nuances. Written information may have little meaning until it is heard. These learners often benefit from reading text aloud and using a tape recorder. So mauni sila ang mga learners nga mas makat-on kung ilang madunggan ang lesson or ang topic. Auditory learners also fall into two categories. The first one is the listeners. This is the more common type. Listeners most likely to do well in school. Out of school too, they remember things said to them and make the information their own. The second one is the talkers. They are the ones who prefer to talk and discuss. They often find themselves talking to those around them. In a classroom setting, when the instructor is not asking questions, auditory verbal processors or the talkers tend to whisper comments to themselves. So the last but not the least under the sensory preferences is the tactile or the kinesthetic learners. They benefit much from a hands-on approach, actively exploring the physical world around them. They may find it hard to sit still for long periods. They may not benefit so much from the discussion or the written materials and may become distracted by their need for activity and exploration. They need to physically touch or try something in order to learn the concept. It is often called multisensory learning because this type of learners hear or see to learn and complete their learning by trying it out themselves. An example of a kinesthetic learning experience is when a child learns to ride a bicycle. They can read or listen to instructions, but deep learning occurs via the process of doing.
So that's all about the sensory preferences. So in summary, visual learners learn best through the use of graphs, illustrations, PowerPoints, pictures, videos, and articles, while the auditory learners learn best on one-on-one conversations, podcasts, group discussions, videos, and oral presentations. And for the kinesthetic, they learn through the hands-on activity, walking meetings, role-playing, and note-taking. So now may I ask everyone to please type in the chat box in which type of learners do you think you belong to? Are you a visual learner, auditory learner, or kinesthetic learner? So now let's proceed to the global analytic continuum. There are two types of thinkers. The first one is the analytic thinker, and the second one is the global. Analytic thinkers tend toward the linear, step-by-step processes of learning. They are considered as the three seers or successive processors. They are more comfortable in a world of details and hierarchies of information. They are also considered as the traditional learners. They focus on details before they can understand the whole concept. Next, global. Global thinkers lean towards nonlinear thought and tend to see the whole pattern rather than particle elements. They are considered as fast seers or simultaneous processors. They need to comprehend the concepts before they begin focusing on the details. They actively participate when the information is related to their lives. So here is a table which shows the difference between analytic and global thinkers. Under the analytic thinkers, they are verbal, responds to word meaning, sequential, processes information linearly, responds to logic, plans ahead, recalls people's names, speaks with few gestures, punctual, prefers formal study design, and lastly, prefers bright lights while studying. Under the global thinkers, they are visual, respond to tone of voice, random, processes information in varied orders, responds to emotion, impulsive, recalls people's faces, gestures when speaking, less punctual, prefers sound or music background while studying, and lastly, prefers frequent mobility while studying. So in addition, several theorists have tied the global analytic continuum to the left brain right brain continuum. In accord with Rogers Perry's model, the left brain dominant individual is portrayed as the linear, verbal, mathematical thinker, while the right-brained person is one who is viewed as global, non-linear, and holistic in thought preferences. Both sides of the brain can reason, but through different strategies in an individual. One side may be more dominant than the other. And that's all about thinking and learning styles. And to discuss about the multiple intelligences, I will give you to Mr. Alvarado. Thank you.
Good day everyone, I am Alberto B. Alvarado Jr. So for today's video, I'm going to talk about multiple intelligence. So multiple intelligence theory. The theory of multiple intelligence was created by Dr. Howard Gardner in 1983. Gardner's theory placed an emphasis on the idea that the traditional understanding of intelligence by means of IQ testing is far too long. To burden this notion of intelligence, Gardner introduced 8 different types of intelligence consisting of logical or mathematical, linguistic, musical, spatial, bodily kinesthetic, naturalist, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. What is intelligence? So, Intelligence was defined by Garner. It is ability to solve problems or passion products that are valuable in one or more cultural settings. Each person may have different multiple intelligence. Even everyone can possess more than one of it, as Garner divided the multiple intelligence into 8 kinds. What are the types of multiple intelligence? So, the types of multiple intelligence are naturalist, bodily kinesthetic, musical, spatial, verbal linguistic, logo mathematical, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. So, verbal linguistic intelligence. Verbal linguistic intelligence is ability to use words and language. These learners have highly developed auditory skills and are generally elegant speakers. They think in words rather than pictures. If you have strong linguistic intelligence, you you might learn better by reading, memorizing, playing word games, and like Scrabble and anagrams and password. Next is logical or mathematical intelligence. So logical or mathematical intelligence is ability to use reasons, logic, and numbers. These learners think conceptually in logical and numerical patterns, making connection between pieces of information. Always curious about the world around them. These learners will ask lots of questions and like to do experiments. If you have strong logical mathematical intelligence, you might learn better by recording information systematically, playing strategy games, analyzing data, and asking logical questions. Next is bodily kinesthetic intelligence. Bodily kinesthetic intelligence is ability to control body movements and handle objects skillfully. These learners express themselves through movement. They have a good sense of balance and eye-hand coordination. Play ball, balancing beams. Through interacting with the space around them, they are able to remember and process information. If you have a strong bodily kinesthetic intelligence, you might learn better by doing role plays, exercises like exercising while reviewing, visiting museums, institutions, parks, and asking logical questions.
Fifth is the musical intelligence or music smart. People who excel in this field learn through patterns of rhythms and music. They can easily repeat or recall a phrase, a piece of music from what they have heard. It includes not only auditory learning but also the identification of patterns through all the senses. The sixth intelligence is the intrapersonal or self-smart intelligence. From the word itself, intra meaning they learn through their feelings, values, and attitudes. They consider themselves as deep emotional thinker. They are one with themselves. Their mind is their safe haven. They are aware of who they are and what they want. This intelligence is a decidedly effective component of learning through which students place value on what they learn and take ownership for their own learning. The seventh one is the interpersonal intelligence or people smart. People who excel in this intelligence learn through interaction with others, meaning they learn through socializing to other people. They are very sensitive to other people's moods, feelings, temperaments, and motivations. They are very empathetic and great at socializing with others on a deeper level. This type of intelligence promotes collaboration and working cooperatively with others, since it requires interactions. The eighth one is the naturalist or nature smart type or form of intelligence. People who excel in this area learn through classification, categories, and hierarchies. They have a knack for identifying the patterns in our natural surroundings. They are sensitive when it comes to the environment. This intelligence is not simply the study of nature, but also it can be used in all the areas of study. And lastly is the existentialist or spirit smart intelligence. People in this type of intelligence learn by seeing the bigger picture. They indulge themselves in life existential questions. Why are we here? What is my role in the world? What is my place in my family, school, and my community? This intelligence seeks connections to the real world in understanding and application of a new learning. And that's all for Howard Gardner's 9 distinct forms of intelligences. To summarize it all, we will play a YouTube video about our lesson.
Hello and welcome to Teachings in Education, Differentiated Instruction. Use differentiated instruction to meet the diverse needs of your students. Now, why should educators differentiate instruction? Well, here are several reasons differentiated instruction should be used in a classroom setting. First off, research has shown us that individuals are better at learning information through different modalities. Differentiated instruction allows educators to cater to learning styles. Next, you must differentiate the rigor of the content because students differ on performance and readiness level. We also recognize that some students will find certain material engaging while others will not. Teachers should differentiate activities as student engagement varies. Let's just say a teacher is giving a lesson on macromolecules. Some students will, quote, get it automatically, while others will feel lost. Teachers may have to differentiate because not all students learn the same material in the same time period. And let's not forget some of the specific types of students in the classroom. There are students with disabilities that require differentiation through modification and accommodations. Also, English language learners. So, how do you actually differentiate instruction in the classroom? Now, there are a bunch of different paths to differentiating instruction, but here is just one strategy that a teacher can use. And this is just one of many ways to differentiate instruction. First off, instruction must be standards-based. Differentiated instruction begins with selection of standards. Next up, determine readiness and student interest through diagnostic testing and learning style inventories. This takes place early on in units. Continuing, deliver varied content to students depending on their learning styles, interest, and content readiness. Follow that up with having students work on varied activities. After students complete the varied activities, take questions and review the standards with the entire class. Next up, provide students with various assessments and projects aligned to the differentiated activities and content. And the last stop, after assessments, again, review the standard with the entire class. You're still teaching an entire class. Again, I will say this. It is important to understand that the roadmap above is not a rule, simply just one idea. It is up to you to come up with your own ways to differentiate instruction. Now, let's take a look at some examples of differentiated instruction. Instruction can be differentiated through content, process, and product. Differentiated content is related to what the students learn. But again, you want it to be the same standard. Some students might reach functions on a standard while others are still focusing on the basics of a standard. The content delivery can be varied based on student interest. For example, some students read stories based on music, while others read stories based on sports. Moving on to differentiation by process. So for example, you can differentiate an activity by creating activity tables. Next, you can differentiate students through various groupings. You may differentiate students based on their levels of readiness, or differentiate the learning process through various number of learning styles. Have some tasks designed for visual students, like creating diagrams, and other tasks for auditory learners. Lastly, you can differentiate the instruction as a product. Some assessment types might be in the best interest of one group of students, but not in the best interest of another group. Offer different types of assessments. Also try to incorporate projects and product assessments to allow for class creativity. Students can come up with their own ideas. And our last segment, what does a differentiated classroom look like? Here is what school administrators should look for when evaluating a differentiated classroom. The first thing they will look for is choice in student assignments. Choice in student assignments should be reflected in lesson plans. Next, administrators want to see more than one text being used in the classroom. Therefore, offer multiple reading texts for students. When differentiating instruction, there should be an overall feel of students having their needs met, and that is through personalized learning. Administrators like to monitor students and teacher through assessments, and they will look to see if students are being assessed in a variety of ways. Lastly, administrators will look to take notice if there is an acknowledgement of student learning styles. There should be teaching to multiple forms of intelligence. Right now, I would just like to say thank you for your time, and I ask that you please subscribe to this channel as I'll be adding more videos on all different educational topics. Teachings in education. Learn, grow, advance in education.
And that sums up our whole discussion about differentiated instruction. We thank you for your time and lending your ears to us, and we hope you gained insights from our discussion this afternoon. Again, we thank you and see you till next presentation.